Welcome back to the Florida Roundup here on Florida Public Radio. I'm Tom Hudson in Miami.
And I'm Melissa Ross in Jacksonville. A federal judge has struck down portions of a Florida election law passed last year, saying in a ruling Thursday that the law uses subtle tactics to suppress the black vote. Now, the law tightened rules on mail-in ballots, drop boxes, and other popular election methods, especially in the pandemic. Changes that made it more difficult for black voters who overall are more socioeconomically disadvantaged than white voters. This was the ruling from U.S. District Judge Mark Walker.
Florida's Republican-led legislature joined several others around the country in passing election reforms after Republican President Donald Trump made unfounded claims that the 2020 election was stolen from him. Democrats have called many of these reforms a partisan attempt to keep some voters from the ballot box. Governor Ron DeSantis, who made the election bill a priority during the legislative session, said the state will appeal Walker's decision. So what does all this mean as you prepare to go to the polls this summer and fall? We've got big elections locally, statewide here in the state of Florida coming up. 305-995-1800 to share your experiences, your questions. What do you have about the voting process coming up here this year? 305-995-1800 or at Florida Roundup on Twitter.
Michelle Kanter Cohen is Policy Director and Senior Counsel for the Fair Election Center and joins us now. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So you've hailed Judge Walker's ruling as a victory for voting rights organizations over new barriers to the ballot you say this law created. If the law had been implemented, if it hadn't been tossed out by the judge, how do you think it would have impacted the process of voting here in Florida?
So this ruling actually enjoins a law that was in effect already because the bill went into effect upon signing last year in 2021. And our case, with the Fair Election Center and Southern Poverty Law Center brought on behalf of Harriett Tubman Freedom Fighters was a victory for voting rights organizations that do voter registration, specifically through community voter registration drives. And what we were seeing already with that law being implemented from May until this ruling is that voter registration organizations were being forced to undermine themselves, and that was a big problem for the voters that are helped by those organizations.
And when you say undermine themselves, you mean more barriers in effect to registering people to vote?
Through specifically a provision which was referred to in the ruling as the disclaimer provision or a warning. So what the law passed last year required is that voter registration organizations tell the voters they are trying to help that the applications might not be turned in. And what the judge found is that violated our clients and the other organizations' freedom of speech, because those organizations are the ones who get to decide how they talk to voters. This is a core political speech right that they have to speak with potential voters and to engage them and to build trust with them in the community. And this law violated that.
What about the judge's order of pre-clearance? This was extraordinary. Judge Walker ruled that for the next 10 years, any attempt by the Florida legislature to write any new laws on the issues he overturned will need court approval, essentially saying the state can't be trusted to write fair voting laws on its own.
Yes, it's absolutely a historic decision. And it's very important to have preclearance because preclearance prevents discriminatory laws from going into effect before they have a chance to taint our elections. And I think hopefully we can all agree that elections should be fair and accessible, and that everyone, no matter who they are, where they come from, should have the right to participate in our democracy. However, discriminatory laws going into effect have been a problem since the decision that the Supreme Court made in Shelby County in 2013, striking down preclearance as part of the preclearance formulas under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so this means that Florida, at least with respect to the specific areas of changes that the judge wrote about, that Florida will be required to get this type of preclearance, and those discriminatory changes won't be able to taint our elections.
Let me ask you as well, the state will appeal. Judge Walker's ruling could be overturned at the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta. How will groups such as yours respond if that should happen?
So certainly I will defer to so a Fair Election Center has claims in the voter registration disclaimer specifically. And I would certainly defer to those counsel who brought the other claims. But, the 11th Circuit will, if the state has said they're going to appeal, the 11th Circuit would have their say next. And no matter what happens, Fair Election Center and I know our client and I'm sure others will continue to fight for the rights of voters to participate.
We're talking voting, elections, the district lines of the state for the full hour here today on the Florida Roundup. What are your questions? There's a lot to get into as we continue with Michelle Kanter Cohen, Senior Counsel at the Fair Elections Center. And you're listening to the Florida Roundup from Florida Public Radio.
The phone number, 305-995-1800, 305-995-1800, about the voting process here in Florida, how it may change, how it may stay the same, and what the judge ruled this week about the efforts to reform Florida voting were unconstitutional. In St. Augustine, Daryl has been listening in on line 8. Daryl, thanks for your patience. You are on the radio. Well, Daryl, you're breaking up quite a bit on your mobile. I don't know if you're on Bluetooth or not. Oh, you're still breaking up there, but let me try to summarize, I think, what you want to ask about, which is appointments to particularly the Supreme Court here in the state of Florida. Michelle, what about the Republican appointees on the state Supreme Court side and this voting rights or voting reform efforts, but also Republican federal appointees on the appeals court and ultimately on the United States Supreme Court, should this case go that far?
So ultimately, we just, as lawyers, we need to make our arguments and, fight for voters. And we certainly hope that the courts will also side with voting rights, but we will have to see what happens as far as future appeals.
Francis in Fort Pierce on the line. Hi, Francis.
Hi, thank you. I really do believe that what they're doing in Tallahassee and this governor when they strangled the overwhelmingly supported Amendment 4 and their other voter suppression attempts is just proof that white supremacy is still alive, just thinly veiled now.
Thank you, Francis. You're referring to the amendment giving people with a felony conviction a path to have their voting rights restored. Michelle Kanter Cohen, in the judge's ruling, he cited Florida's long and frankly shameful history of racist policies when it comes to providing access to the ballot. And so this isn't a new battle in this state, is it?
It's not. And that is really where the importance of this decision, finding intentional discrimination and finding that means Florida will have to get that preclearance from the court before making further changes comes in. That is because of that racial discrimination and the shameful history here, and specifically with respect to voting.
Yeah, Amendment 4, we're talking about the federal ruling on Florida's new voting rights law. We've also been talking about the process of redistricting, which could eliminate minority access districts in Florida. There's so many moving parts, Michelle, happening at the same time. So that's why we decided to give it the full hour. It's a complex issue with a lot of tentacles, isn't it?
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, what's really important is that voters get to choose who represents them, and voters get to have a voice. And so all of these issues really go to that priority, or what should be our priority is listening to the voice of voters. Politicians shouldn't pick their voters. The voters should pick who represents them and who speaks for them in Tallahassee and at the federal level.
We've got one more voter to hear from. I think, Susan, you're a voter in Mount Dora. Is that right? Registered voter?
Yes, that's right.
Great. We've got about 40 seconds, but we want to hear from you. Go ahead, please.
Oh my gosh, my head is exploding with all of this. Plus, I live in Lake County. This is the county of the most infamous sheriff probably in Florida's history, Willis McCall, who was accused, and I actually suddenly don't remember if he was ever convicted of killing innocent black men for false accusations of murder. This is the story that the Gilbert King book was about, Willis McCall. So a few decades later, the head of our county commission here has a husband, a doctor, who put a sign on his door saying anybody who's voting for Obama dare not come in here. So it's kind of like the people who have populated Florida for a long time are lacking conscience. How do you instill conscience in a population?
That's a question for the ages.
Yeah, right. Susan, appreciate you adding that to the conversation.
Thank you, Michelle Cohen, too, with Fair Election Center. Thanks for all the calls. We're out of time. The Florida Roundup, produced by WJCT Public Media in Jax, WLRN Public Media in Miami. Heather Schatz and Natu Tway are producers. Catherine Hobbs is associate producer.
The director of radio operations and the program's director in WLRN is Peter J. Maris. Engineering help each and every week from Doug Peterson, Charles Michaels, and Josh Torres. Thanks, fellas. Richard Ives answers the phones. Theme music provided by Miami jazz guitarist Aaron Levos at aaronlevos.com. I'm Tom Hudson.
And I'm Melissa Ross. We'll be back next Friday at noon. Have a great weekend.